Good morning. This is Business Live with me, Ian King. UK consumer confidence appears to be rising as well as ease. The Consumer Confidence Index, published by the market research company GfK, rose to -19 in January, up from -22 in December, which was the highest level for 2 years. It follows the fall in inflation to 4%, raising hopes of interest rate cuts at some point this year. Well, joining me now is Joe Statham, Chief Client Strategy Director at GfK. Joe, welcome to you. I mean, it is still a minus number. We should need to keep it in perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. The interesting thing about the index, you really have to dig into it. And the one number that we look at is our personal financial situation for the coming year, and that's actually registering 0, and that's the best it's been for a long while. The reason we look at that indicator in particular, which is part of the bigger index, is because it's how we think about our personal situation going forward. So we can't control the major economic picture of the UK. I wish we could. We can't. It's how much money we've got coming in, how much money we've got going out, so we can plan for the future and think in a future tense. So rather than it being very negative, where we tend to hunker down and not spend, this boost to confidence, I think, is great. And it's a really welcome sign of what's going on in real time, I would say. This is not a lagging indicator. It's not a leading indicator. It's a snapshot of how consumers think and feel in the here and now.
Is this all being driven by inflation expectations, or do you think there's more to it than that?
I'm sure it's a whole bag of stuff, but I would say decreasing or steady inflation is important. The one thing that we know impacts everybody is food inflation, which is still high, but headline figures, of course, add to the overall mood of the financial mood of the nation. And, the sun's out, so, I would say there's probably a spring in our steps going forwards. So interest rates being stable and dropping, the housing market sort of being fairly stable. All of this will add to our sense of financial well-being.
I mean, inflation ticked up in December. We're expecting another modest increase in January, but the trend is low. On that basis, would you expect to see consumer confidence ticking ahead in coming months?
Yeah, well, my crystal ball is bust and I don't forecast. But I would say there's momentum. There's an underlying momentum, the likes of which we haven't seen for a couple of years. So I'm quietly optimistic that we'll see some uptick in the index in the coming months.
Looking at how the index has behaved in the past, Joe, does an uptick in consumer confidence of this kind tend to translate into higher consumer spending?
It can do. We've done this for 50 years, Ian, so we kind of know what's going on here, and we only ever see big jumps in the index. It's quite flat. It doesn't really jiggle about a lot. We see big drops. So Brexit, there was a big fall and a rebound. COVID, a fall and a rebound. So at the moment, we are seeing some stability, but the line is edging upwards. What's dragging it down again is the global economy and the headwinds of the global economy. I think people's personal balance sheet seems to be okay, despite the concerns about inflation and everything's gone up. Council tax, broadband, you name it, it's gone up. We're seeing people spending less in the shops, I think, because people have got other priorities. But if people have money, they are still spending it. So over the years we've done this. Confidence means that we look forward. We think about going on holiday. We think about replacing the fridge. So we have a sort of future perspective, and we plan to spend rather than save. So fingers crossed we see this translate into a boost in the economy.
Indeed so. Joe, good to talk to you this morning. Thank you. Some other business news stories for you now. And the Competition and Markets Authority said today it had launched a formal investigation into the proposed merger between Vodafone's UK business and 3UK. The deal, first announced in June last year, would bring together the third and fourth biggest operators in the UK market, and they would leapfrog EE, owned by BT, to become the market leader by customer numbers. The CMA now has 40 working days to assess whether the deal may lead to a substantial lessening of competition, and if so, whether a more in-depth Phase 2 investigation is required. Superdry is seeking a new chief financial officer for the fourth time in 5 years. It comes after Sean Wills stepped down after just under 3 years at the fashion group. Mr Wills succeeded Nick Gresham, who was in the job from May 2019 to October 2020. His predecessor, Ed Barker, one of our older readers there, Eric Barker, he served from April 2018 to April 2019. Mr Wills, who was previously Superdry's CFO from 2012 to 2015, before leaving to join Marks & Spencer, will be replaced on an interim basis by Giles David. The news came as Superdry reported a pre-tax loss of £25.3 million on an adjusted basis for the 26 weeks to the 28th of October. That was up from a loss of £17.7 million in the same period a year earlier. The Superdry said it had been impacted by the challenging consumer retail market, unseasonal weather and its wholesale business underperforming. Shares of Wix rose by nearly 5% this morning after the UK's second-largest do-it-yourself retailer said annual profits would be towards the top end of City expectations. Wix, which trades from 229 stores across the UK, said full-year sales for 2023 were in line with those of 2022 on a like-for-like basis. That, of course, is the measure that strips out the impact of new store openings and refurbishments. Well, that's despite a slight slip in so-called do-it-for-me sales, projects such as kitchen and bathroom installations during the second half of the year. WH Smith said today it's on track to open 110 shops this financial year, including 50 in North America, as it continues to benefit from the recovery in travel. The company, now one of the world's biggest travel retailers, said its like-for-like sales during the 20 weeks to last Saturday were up 5% on a year earlier. That was despite a 3% drop in sales on the UK high street. Its UK travel business enjoyed a 14% uptick in sales, with improving passenger numbers across UK airports, a strong performance in hospitals and at its stores in railway stations. The shares are currently up 0.5%. Now, CityFibre, which owns the UK's largest independent fibre network, said today its annual sales had gone above £100 million for the first time. The company, which since 2018 has been owned by a consortium led by Goldman Sachs, said its network passed 3.5 million premises in 2023, while it added more than 165,000 new customer connections, nearly double what it achieved in 2022. And joining me now is CityFibre's Chief Executive, Greg Mesh. Greg, good to see you again. Have connections been in line with your expectations?
Well, it's been above our expectations. We've almost doubled our connections this year.
That's pretty good. I mean, who are the big ISPs? I assume it's the likes of Vodafone.
If you remember, which thank you for having us back and Happy New Year to everyone, but 5 years ago you had me on this show and it was the beginning of our journey, and a lot chuckled at the thought that some early stage company could build a transformational infrastructure across the UK and deliver superior speeds and services to consumers. But 5 years later, we're across 3.5 million, which is getting to be 10% of the whole UK, on a mission to get across 30% of the UK. We've added 165,000 customers just last year. That's huge for a small company, right? But most importantly, we've crossed that 100 million threshold, which is a big round number that people can get their heads around. We're coming from nothing to 100 million in sales, and we're now profitable. We're EBITDA profitable. We'll be profitable this whole year. And we've also become a really key component of the government now, in that we've secured £380 million of subsidy to start building our infrastructure from the cores of cities out into the hard-to-reach rural areas. So we're a real factor now into the market. And again, the most important thing is that we've sparked the whole industry into an investment cycle, right? And the UK is suddenly in an incredible, enviable situation. And all of Europe, everybody's looking at it and saying, how did the UK go from a laggard to suddenly a leader in digital infrastructure? And it's because of competition. We've sparked that, and that's unleashed 20 to 30 billion of private investment into the UK, rebuilding the digital infrastructure. So it's a real proud day for us.
That's good to hear. Now, last year, the regulator Ofcom allowed BT's Openreach's Equinox 2 price scheme to go ahead. Obviously, big discounts for that. You were very unhappy about that. It doesn't seem to have affected you, though.
I was very unhappy because we just felt it's incumbent behavior trying to protect its market, not really benefiting the consumers. If you noticed, they raised the retail pricing and then they dropped the wholesale pricing, and the wholesale pricing just is hurting us. So they weren't doing anything for the consumer. What they were doing is trying to stop their big ISPs like Vodafone, TalkTalk, and your parent Sky from moving over to CityFibre. And they were doing that by bringing down the wholesale rates. Well, we just thought that was very disingenuous, to be honest, to the overall market and to what's going on. I mean, they should be bringing down retail rates, not bringing down.
But your connections have doubled during the year, Greg. It doesn't seem to have hurt you.
That's because we're a powerful seller. We're a powerful wholesaler. And remember, we're a challenger in a market that's been a duopoly. It's been a weak duopoly, BT across everything and Virgin's across half the UK. That's by definition a weak duopoly. We've entered as a real challenger network. And what's a challenger? What's it have to do? It has to have innovative and better products and better economics. Now, if you can prove that, you will definitely bring. Remember, we're not really selling connections, we're selling customers. 330,000 customers now benefit with better, high-quality internet at lower cost. So the spark of competition is really transforming the UK right now, and we're super pleased with our results from last year. It was a hard year. It was a hard year for everyone, right? We did a lot of restructuring, but we were super productive.
OK, Greg, there's lots more I wanted to ask you. We're out of time, I'm afraid. Come back and see us again soon.
Okay,
thank you.
Thank you.
Now, one of the big outcomes of the COP28 UN climate change conference last month was an agreement to triple the world's installed renewable energy generation capacity by 2030. But there are plenty of potential obstacles in the way, including raising financing and overcoming planning constraints. I've been speaking with Claudio Fachin, the chief executive of Hitachi Energy, the global leader in power grids. I began by asking him whether the agreement made at COP28 was achievable.
Yes, it is. It is, but it's not going to be an easy one. It's not going to be a walk in the park. It requires changes in how we approach it. And as usually we say it as well, it's not so much about technology being the bottleneck. It's really more about policies, the regulatory environment that needs to adjust, and the way we also collaborate. So a lot of changes in business models to be able to scale.
What about the financing? Where is that going to come from?
We haven't seen any, let's say, bottleneck or any constraint from a financing standpoint. Of course, it depends country by country, market by market. There are some nuances there. The maturity curve on how this financing works in different markets is slightly different, but altogether, it's really more about creating an environment from a policy standpoint that makes it attractive and that gives the enough long-term perspective for investors to come in and say, okay, here is a long run for us to go in.
You mentioned policy standpoints there, because another key question that people will have is planning regimes around the world. Potentially, that's a huge obstacle.
Indeed. So it's a very good point. The planning part is the one that actually needs to be addressed if we want to really change for scale and for speed. I'll give you an example. In our technology, like high voltage direct current, it's large systems that integrate, for instance, offshore wind, gigawatts worth of offshore wind, bring it into the onshore grid. That takes a long time for execution, but from a technology standpoint, we can execute those projects in 3 to 4 years. But the planning of that and the permitting of that, it takes 10 to 5 years, best case. And that, of course, needs to be addressed if we really want to meet the targets.
If you look around the world, and I know you're in 90 countries worldwide, which countries are setting about this the best way, and in particular, enhancing their grid and putting on more capacity to grids?
Well, I'll start saying that UK is doing a good job with some ups and downs, and we saw that some of the auctions on the offshore side did not work well in the past, but they've been quite proactively addressing that and adjusting the course to make those opportunities attractive. So I'd say UK was quite also ahead on this whole decarbonization of the energy system. The goals are pretty ambitious with the 2035. Europe, no doubt, altogether, also ahead of most of the other markets. But what is very different than in the past is now we have most of the economies, most of the countries in that same path. So 90%, plus the 90% of the total GDP has one way or another committed to a net zero. And that, of course, is it's essential for us to get it done across the globe.
You've been quite clear that, while historically grids have tended to be national and regional, now there needs to be more interconnectivity. Why is that so crucial for people who don't understand the issues?
Very important. That's a key point. We call it, we need to look at a system of systems. There is a lot of, if you look at Europe, UK, altogether, it's already an integrated electricity market. And there is a lot of benefits out of that. There is a lot of interconnections. We provided some technology for that between UK, Scandinavia, so leveraging the hydro opportunity in Scandinavia as also storage. And then when there is wind available in the UK, instead of curtailing that energy, then you can go back and pump up the water to use it then when it's needed. Connections to Germany, to France. And there is, of course, much more interconnection capacity needed. And it's very simple also in other terms. If you, of course, install solar panels in the UK and you install solar panels in Spain or potentially even North Africa, of course, the utilization, the capacity factors, as we call it, it's quite different. So you get much more out of those investments. And then if you are able then to bring that energy from long distances, and therefore you need that infrastructure piece.
That could potentially be quite difficult, though, in where you've got countries that don't necessarily get along. I mean, I'm thinking, for example, of, say, Pakistan and India.
Well, so first of all, there is a thinking about interconnecting across region as well. And of course, geopolitics plays a big role. But, if you look at it currently, geopolitics plays an even much bigger role when it comes to fossil fuel and the oil and gas part. So what I think is important for people to understand is that to decarbonize the energy system, which is essential in order for us to meet net zero, we have to electrify. And electricity, from that perspective, is way more efficient than molecules. If you just think about the efficiency of electrical cars versus internal combustion, from the generation of the energy, of course, on renewable, take for instance wind, and then the energy that goes into the wheel on an electrical vehicle, it's about 15 to 20% losses in the entire cycle. If you do the same and generate electricity with fossil fuel and then you put it into a internal combustion, 2/3 of the energy gets lost in that cycle. So it's very important for us to understand that migrating to electricity is also having a much more efficient, not only a more sustainable energy system.
Well, still to come here on Business Live. We'll have a look at how the markets are doing this Friday morning. Stay with us.
Play Sky News.
From the Sky News Centre at 7.
Now that you're up to date, we can go into a bit more detail.
Things can change incredibly quickly.
Taken by surprise.
Have you ever known a moment like this in British politics before? Yes. Cheers.
We'll start with breaking news.
Let's get the latest on the ground.
So, by the end, we'll hopefully all understand what's going on in the world just that little better.
I'm Inzamam Rashid and I'm Sky's North of England correspondent, telling stories from this culturally rich region I call home.
If the Taliban found your family, what would happen? I think they're just going to straight away execute them.
There are issues of racism in all levels of cricket.
I was on the balcony a couple of times. I was nearly gone.
Football is a joy to watch. When people are disappointed, you can feel the hate.
I've always tried to put people at the heart of the story, like hearing from young women who've been spiked via injections.
I just felt physically sick. That's really in my system.
Men, they want to force you doing something which you don't want to do, just because you're homeless.
We give a voice to communities often unheard and unserved from a region with a distinct history and global impact.
I just took a shower above the clouds. You know why? Because this is the Emirates A380. It's like Emirates, it's like better.
Well, another positive session on Wall Street last night, in which the S&P 500 hit a new record for the fifth consecutive day, was followed by mixed trade overnight in the Asia-Pacific region. You could ignore the Sydney reading the bottom of the screen there. They were closed for Australia Day. Of course, happy Australia Day to all of our Australian viewers. Most stock indices in the region have notched up weekly gains. Well, in Europe this morning, stocks are trading all to the upside right now. As you can see, draw your attention in particular to the CAC 40 in France in the top right-hand corner of the screen. And that is up more than 2%. I think mainly because LVMH, the luxury goods giant, which is the biggest company in France and on the CAC 40, that's up nearly 10% in Paris after its quarterly results published overnight were well received. Well, here in London, the FTSE 100 is also going into the weekend with a spring in its step, up more than 1% in a broad-based rally led by consumer stocks. In terms of the leading gainers, well, Burberry is among them. I think that is a read across from LVMH, the luxury goods giant. While Diageo is currently top of the FTSE leaderboard, up nearly 4.25%. That's following strong results from its French rival Rémy Cointreau today. St James's Place, meanwhile, has rallied 2.5% after yesterday's trading update-driven sell-off. Not too many fallers to mention in the FTSE just now, but Tesco and Sainsbury's are both lower on broker comment. Outside the FTSE, Wizz Air is up some 2%. Right, look at that, nearly 3.5% now. Obviously, it sold off after its results yesterday. Meanwhile, Saga is up 9%. That's after it confirmed a story from Sky's Mark Kleinman that it's exploring a potential partnership for its cruise business. On the foreign exchange markets, well, the pound continues to trade at close to a 4-month high against the euro. Sterling also up 0.25% against the dollar. I suspect that may be on the back of those consumer confidence figures. The euro, meanwhile, also in the pink today, in positive territory against the dollar. As for the oil price, well, that yesterday hit its highest level since the 30th of November, following the bigger-than-expected drawdown in US crude stocks earlier this week. Barrel of Brent crude currently changing hands at $82.09 a barrel, down 0.2% on the session. Well, joining me this morning is Sophie Lund-Yates, the lead equity analyst at Hargreaves Lansdown. Sophie, good to see you this morning. I think we have to start with LVMH, don't we? I mean, the biggest company in the CAC 40, and it's up 10%. Really rip-roaring move.
Hi, Ian. Great to be back. Yes, absolutely. This is the biggest story at the moment moving European markets. LVMH had their full year results last night, and they essentially recorded another record year and free cash flow of 8 billion euros. I mean, just absolutely phenomenal amounts. But within that, what I would say is that growth is slowing. So growth is still resilient, but it is slowing down. And that is coming from broader macroeconomic weakness, really, which is affecting even luxury consumers. But as you can see, the market's definitely breathing a bit of a sigh of relief. And you can see that in the scale of the moves today.
I mean, there's been such a sort of pall of despond over the luxury goods sector over the last few months, Sophie. I mean, do you think the fact that we've seen the rally of this magnitude suggests that there was a fair bit of short interest going into these results?
So there remains a little bit of short interest in some broader luxury stocks. I don't think that it's particularly dramatic at the moment, but a lot of that is stemming from there is ongoing uncertainty, particularly for some of the less diversified names compared to LVMH. So LVMH, obviously, this huge conglomerate that has a huge stable of brands, which puts it in a slightly more resilient pocket than some others. So certainly there is a lot to monitor, and a lot can change at short notice, particularly when we start looking at the economic recovery in Asia in particular. So yes, lots of uncertainty remaining.
Closer to home, Sophie, we had an update from WH Smith today. I mean, a lot of people still associate it with the high street. This is really a travel retail business now, isn't it?
It absolutely is. So really what we're seeing is that WH Smith over the last couple of years or so is really pivoting towards travel locations. So that's things like service stations, hospitals, even railway stations, airports, of course. And this is an area it's a very fragmented market, and there's a lot of growth for the taking, particularly in overseas markets where they're focusing a lot of attention, particularly in the likes of North America. So a lot of exciting stuff going on there. So the high street business is continuing to decline, but the market's frankly not too concerned about that. It's expected, and the growth levers at their disposal very much are this travel business, and it's a strategic pivot that makes a great deal of sense, to be blunt about it.
Well, it's appropriate you're speaking to us from Cheltenham today, because we've also heard from the company that owns most of Cheltenham today, Superdry.
Yes, we have indeed. Unfortunately, I do have to say that the challenges are persisting in quite a big way. So just to put this in a bit of context, Superdry has seen its shares down almost 90% over the last 12 months or so, which is really, really quite stark. And that is because of a mixture of factors. Some of those are operational in nature. They've had some kind of inventory mismanagement, for example. Other sides of it are broader consumer weakness. We've seen that revenue in the first half was down 23%. That was announced today. And that is because of heavy discounting that we saw in December, as well as a really warm winter as well so far, which has not helped sales either. There are a lot of challenges for them to traverse and a lot to monitor.
All right, got to leave it there, Sophie. Good to see you as ever. Thank you. That's it from me. I'm back at 4:30. Hope to see you then. Wilf's up next. Do stay tuned. The latest from the ICJ.
Good afternoon. It is midday. You're watching Sky News today. In just a moment, the International Criminal Court is expected to rule on whether Israel should suspend its war against Hamas in Gaza, while the court considers ongoing, which will take longer, whether genocide is being committed. These are live pictures inside the court, as you can see. As soon as the proceedings restart, we will go to them live. I'm joined here on set by a brace of professors, as we've just been discussing, by Antonis Xanakopoulos, who is a professor of public international at the University of Oxford, and by Professor Michael Clarke, of course, who you all know well. Michael, just quickly remind us what decision we're exactly waiting for here.
Yeah, well, if this is the International Court of Justice, the ICJ, it is going to make a preliminary ruling on whether, in a sense, whether there is a case to answer. Everyone thinks that this will be a decision on whether Israeli policy is genocidal. It's not. It's a decision on whether there is something to investigate. And that investigation would take a few years. But the preliminary decision has quite a lot of political weight. So it does matter what happens today, and it certainly matters to Israel. If it is said, yes, you have a case to answer for genocide, that's a very serious charge for Netanyahu to carry with him into the years to come. I suspect it'd be very hard to stand that up in 4 or 5 years, but who knows? But a preliminary decision, the bar is very low. You know, is there a case to answer? Maybe there is.
Professor Xanakopoulos, what is your take on how significant it would be if this preliminary decision, as Michael outlines it, goes against Israel?
Yeah, so again, as Professor Clarke said, this is the International Court of Justice, not the International Criminal Court. These are two different tribunals. So this is a court that resolves disputes between states. And we're at the provisional measure stage, which means that the court exactly is going to look at whether the rights that are claimed by South Africa are actually plausible under the Genocide Convention. And then it's going to issue an order about what should happen between now and the time when the court can actually get to the substance of the dispute, to the actual merits of the case. This is going to be very, very important because it has already started having effects on the ground, even before the order of the court is read out, because immediately after South Africa brought the case against Israel, we saw a couple of things. We saw, Israel trying to backpedal a little bit on the rhetoric and issuing clarificatory statements about previous statements and so on and so forth. But we've also seen states like Italy indicate a couple of days ago that they have seized their shipments of arms to Israel for fear of being held complicit, potentially, in genocide. And so this could have a long-lasting effect for many years until we hear the outcome of the case.
The judges are filing in. As soon as they begin reading out their judgment, we'll go to it. Michael, what could they issue? They could issue an order for Israel
Yes,
would it be?
They can issue an order to do anything. They could issue an order for Israel to desist, to agree a ceasefire. They could issue an order to embargo arms to Israel. Thing is, they've got no power of enforcement. But as a court, if they say, look, we think there is a case to answer, therefore we demand that these things be enacted, these following measures be taken in order that the situation doesn't get any worse, that's in a way what they'd be saying. And they can choose to order whatever they like.
Would Israel listen?
No. Well, they'll listen in the sense that it's a problem. But Israel won't do them, I'm sure, unless it takes a different view. But I'm sure if the judgment goes against Israel here, I think the Israelis will be outraged. They'll be very angry. I mean, to accuse Israel of genocide when the Genocide Convention of 1948 was established specifically because of the Holocaust of the Second World War, the shamefulness of that is a problem for them. And I think the Israelis would just reject anything. They won't want to go along with this judgment if it goes against them at all, even though they might be compelled towards it.
I think we might be about to hear the judgment begin to be read out. Let's just pause for a moment and bring up the sound. Doesn't sound like things have begun quite yet. Whilst we wait, just briefly, Professor Xanakopoulos, what exactly are you listening out for here? What's the spread of possibilities?
Yeah, so the court is going to look at a number of things. It needs to be satisfied, first, that there is a dispute under the Genocide Convention, because that's what we're talking about here. So that there is actually a disagreement between the two states.
I think we can now listen into the judgment.
In the case concerning application of the Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide in the Gaza Strip, South Africa versus Israel. Judge Robinson, who duly participated in both the deliberation and the final vote, is, for reasons made known to me, unable to take his seat on the bench today. I would like to welcome the eminent representatives of the Republic of South Africa and the State of Israel who are in the Great Hall of Justice today. In particular, I recognize the presence of Her Excellency, Ms. Naledi Pandor, Minister of International Relations and Cooperation of the Republic of South Africa. I recall that on 29 December 2023, South Africa filed in the Registry of the Court an application instituting proceedings against Israel concerning alleged violations in the Gaza Strip of obligations under the Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide, to which I shall refer as the Genocide Convention or the Convention. The application of South Africa contained a request for the indication of provisional measures submitted with reference to Article 41 of the statute and to Articles 73, 74, and 75 of the Rules of Court. In accordance with the usual practice, I shall not read the introductory paragraphs of the order which set out the procedural history of the case. I shall also omit or summarize some other paragraphs. I shall therefore begin the reading of the order at paragraph 13. In the order, the Court begins by recalling the immediate context in which the present case came before it. It observes that on 7 October